Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Ah, those were the good old days, weren't they? Oh, yes. Well, I didn't see you there. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monorail Monday. I'm Mr. Coaster, your host, and I have here a glass of wine that I might enjoy while I tell you some stories. Okay, sorry. Having a glass of wine, enjoying my Monorail Monday. So, I've been to the future. I saw that a few of you really liked episode 1, went back to the past and said, all right, keep going with Monorail Monday season 3, episode number 14. So, we're going to talk a little bit about cast member Shenanigans. Not always doing things by the book. If you happen to listen to the Mouse Knows Best podcast, I was a guest on that a couple of weeks back, and we talked a little bit about some behind the scenes and some monorail stories. One of those included speed. We're going to talk about some speed tonight, and a couple other goofy stories from monorail history. People ask, what's the maximum speed of the monorail? Well, generally, it's 40 miles an hour. When you're driving on the beam with guests, the max speed for some of the straightaways, contemporary to the Transportation Center, Grand Floridian to the Polynesian, on the express beam, those are generally about 40 miles an hour. The stations are generally about 15. If you're on the express beam and you're passing through the Grand Floridian, it's about 15 is your max. You can go faster than that, but then the governor will stop your train. If you're going faster than that for more than a couple seconds, it'll give you what we call an overspeed. That would stop the train, and then you could go again. Now, when we did testing for the Mark 6 monorails, we had to run those around so many thousand miles before we could put guests on them. So you'd run those around overnight, multiple nights in a row, weeks in a row, to get them the required mileage so they could be on the system. You also had to have a Mark 4 train on there as a chase train, and it would just sort of be to make sure that the computers on each train were picking up the other train's existence on the track and sensors and things like that. On this one particular occasion, we were on Monorail Red to Transportation Center, and we're actually going the opposite direction. We were operating out of the rear cab, cab 6, so we were heading opposite to where the train normally goes. Normally you go out of the Transportation Center, you take a right, and you go and you loop all the way through Epcot, and then you come into the station. We were actually driving the opposite direction in this particular evening, which no guests on the train. It doesn't really matter what direction we're going. The reason they were doing that particularly is just at the end of the night when you circle around, we're facing the switch as opposed to having to back out and back out of the station and then pull forward. Very confusing, but we're going the opposite direction. So we're blazing a trail down that straightaway, 40 miles an hour. We make the turn towards the Epcot lot. We make the turn into the station. Now remember, we're going the opposite way. So we're coming into the monorail station at Epcot first, and then we're going to go through the station and through Epcot by the Living Seas, the Land, Imagination, and all the way around, and then back out by Energy. So we're going that opposite direction through that loop. So there, of course, because we're still running, there's always somebody manning the stations where the beams are being operated. So somebody was sitting in Epcot station, and boy, they didn't have any idea what was coming, because all of a sudden we came blazing through the station. That's normally 15, and a train will be going slow and maybe even stop. We came blazing through that station at 40 easily, and we were accelerating. We basically had the thing cranked to the max, and we hit the Epcot loop at about 55 to 60 miles an hour and flew around that loop. And it does not feel smooth. If you're thinking, how fast does it feel to be? It feels like your car, your old 20-year-old car is coming apart on the highway. That's kind of what it feels like. I mean, it was shuddering, it was shaking, and that thing just went whipping around. At one point, I thought we were going to be wrenched off the beam it just seemed crazy. It seemed crazy fast. You 60 miles an hour in your car, no big deal. 60 miles an hour in a monorail around a curve around Epcot, it was intense. It was a pretty good ride, I'll tell you that. So that was the fastest I went. I know some people have probably gone a little bit faster, probably on the straightaways or coming down the hills out of the Contemporary. Those Mark IVs, it was more common that you could defeat the Governor in a Mark IV. And if you hit that and you had the accelerated, the downhill, you could really get going fast when times when you weren't supposed to be going so fast. So that was my experience of going super fast, almost 60 miles an hour through the Epcot loop in the opposite direction. It was nuts. It was really, really nuts. But a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And that was on the old Mark IVs. I'm not sure if the Mark VIs could get up that high except going downhill these days. But so anyway, that's a little bit of fun. And sometimes the Governor might be turned off during one of our shifts. And we had rotating drive times. I might drive from 3 to 4, and then Jerry's going to drive from 4 to 5. So on a couple of occasions, we had the Governor was accidentally turned off by maintenance. And you had to be sort of careful because you wanted to drive faster than you were supposed to, but if you drove too fast, if you blew through the Contemporary at 40, and it's happened, people have done that, everybody in the Contemporary notices. It makes a big sound. It throws a lot of breeze through the hotel. People definitely know when a monorail goes racing through there. And so people have been written up and gotten calls from managers at the Contemporary going, what the heck is going on with the monorail? Who's driving that train? So you definitely wanted to make sure that you weren't going through the Contemporary too fast all the time. And yet, people did. So the second story about Shenanigans is going to deal with the radio. One of my favorite things to do, and if you follow the Instagram Monorail Monday, I told a lot of these stories over there with just a short little paragraph or something attached to a monorail photo for probably a year or 2 years maybe before I started doing the video version of Monorail Monday. And I've just told this to a few people. But one of the things I used to do was talk on the radio. Talking on the radio is not shenanigans in and of itself. But people used to play on the radio. And one of the things you used to get drivers, like somebody would go, bud, somebody would go, wise, like the frogs, older folks among you. Older, I mean like, over 20 or whatever. That was a popular commercial, Budweiser commercial in the 90s. So people used to do that kind of stuff, or you'd hear like, woo, just, you'd have silly stuff like that. People would hit on the radio. They couldn't tell what train it came from. So, they'd try and figure, okay, well, there's 8, 10 monorails. It's got to be one of these 8 people, but they couldn't really define who exactly it was. So this kind of stuff happened periodically. They really didn't like it because, especially because the guests are in the front cab and can hear the radio chatter. Nowadays you can't. Now the guests aren't riding up front in the monorail anymore, but when you could, they could listen to all the radio chatter going on. So they wanted us to present good show for the guests in the operating cab of the monorail. However, not everybody was on board with that. Now what I like to do was I would be very professional on the radio all the time, but I would make my radio calls really, really lengthy. When I could say special door on Monorail Blue in a radio transmission to the Magic Kingdom, I would instead go into this lengthy discussion about Magic Kingdom from Monorail Blue. There's a special door in car 4 of our fine monorail coming to you. This family of 4 would be delighted if you would come and help them exit the monorail when we get to the next station. They are wearing this shirt and that shirt, and they're very lovely people. This is the first time they've been to the Magic Kingdom. It would just basically turn it into some sort of 3-minute thing instead of what should have been like a 10-second transmission. A couple times supervisor go, Bill, stop with the radio. And I'm like, am I not being professional? No, you're the most professional person on the radio we have. Just too much. So that just sort of made me want to just poke their buttons just a little bit more and add more stuff. But it was always in the very professional context. I was always relaying information that was important to the system. I just was excessively verbose in making my information happen. So this was just an occasional thing I used to throw in there, just especially if there were particular supervisors who I knew it really irritated them. I would make sure to do it when they were doing. I'd be good all day, and then when, say, Timmy would come on at the last 2 hours of my shift, Timmy came on to be the manager to close, I'd make sure I'd make one of those just to irritate Timmy a little bit. But always very professional. Any guests are hearing them in the other trains, they think, wow, just look at all this wonderful information this cast member is sharing people. So nobody could ever say I was doing anything that would impede guest satisfaction or anything like that. So that leads me to this other thing. So when you leave monorails, it was always a tradition you give a 10-7 spiel. 10-7 is a radio code, means out of service. Usually you'd say it at the end of the night. Monorail red is 10-7 in the Grand Floridian, meaning you shut down for the night in the Grand Floridian or wherever you were parking the train. You would give that little announcement. But when a cast member was completing their time in monorails, they were either transferring to another department or they just were leaving the Walt Disney Company, they would give a 10-7 spiel at the end of their final lap. You get to pick which beam you want to do a final lap on. Usually it was Epcot because that's the longest one. So you go around and make your final lap. And at the end you make a spiel. A little quick radio announcement. Hey, thanks, it's been great. Gonna miss you guys. That kind of thing. Very, very cool tradition. So because of my, because of my radio history, when I was leaving, the monorail supervisors were terrified of what I was going to do or say. I'd been known to poke managers a little bit here and there. I'd been known to make lengthy radio calls. They thought I was going to be on the radio for a half hour or more. They were scared what I was going to do or say on my way out the door. But as always, I kept it very simple. I actually didn't even make it one of my longer. It was probably about a 30 or 40 second 10-7 spiel. It really wasn't that long, but I loved the idea that they were worried about it. That was pretty fun. So I made my spiel and I talked about, I became a flight attendant after that. And so I made some peanut jokes and things like that. But that was kind of fun making that final. Somewhere in one of the archives here, I have the copy because I actually wrote down everything that I was going to say. So somewhere I've got my actual 10-7 spiel written down. Hopefully I can unearth that at some point. Maybe I'll read that off to you guys. And speaking of the flight attendant thing, pretty soon I got some travel talk kind of videos coming up. They're going to be talking about some stories of travel, places we've gone, places you should go, recommendations, things like that. It's just going to be a bunch of different travel chatter of all sorts of different kinds. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in a few episodes of that is going to be stories from my years as a flight attendant. And trust me, there are some great stories from my years as a flight attendant. Okay, last story for the night. As you know, when I was working there, the Mark 6s were coming online, but once they came on the system, you would retire that same color in the Mark IV version. They usually ran concurrently, but not very long. It would be, maybe a few hours, a couple of days where you'd have, I think there's a picture out there of Mark 6 black and Mark 4 black parallel to each other as one is entering and one is exiting the transportation center. That's kind of a cool picture that shows the two different monorails together. So as they retired these, at first people were like, oh, what are they going to do? Oh, they're just going to put them aside and they may sell them to somebody else. And after a couple went by, basically word came in, they're being dumped. They're basically going back to the Disney landfill backstage and they're just being trashed. And so this really alarmed a couple of us who've been there, been going since the park opened, since those Mark IV monorails start online. And it just horrified us to think that these trains were going back there and just being tossed back there or buried. We were basically told, a lot of people were being told, it's just they're being buried. They're just burying them under the ground. And just that horrified us. So we hatched this plan. Me and a couple of my buddies. This is at post A-Team. The A-Team has already aired and been canceled, but that's got our wheels turning, our minds thinking about what can we do. So we concocted this lengthy plan to go backstage, sneak past security, armed with some tools, to go back there and like detach, basically disassemble some portions of a monorail. Like we were gonna like grab a couple of doors, maybe grab the pieces of console or some pieces from the operating cab, whatever we could remove. And of course, none of us were in maintenance, so we didn't know exactly what tools we might need to remove some of these doors and some of these different pieces of the monorail. So we basically hatched this. We drew on napkins and some paper. Here's what we're gonna do. Here's where the backstage, where the landfill is. We're gonna go back here and we'll do this. I can't say that this was a foolproof plan or that it was a particularly brilliant plan. It may have been I don't have the plans in my archive. I don't have the plans to sneak off with the Mark IV monorail pieces in my archive, or I would share those with you for sure. But I thought it was pretty funny that we planned this whole thing out, and we kept talking like, when this date comes up, Monorail Black, Monorail Purple, whatever the train was that was coming offline, we're going to go back there and we're going to hit this monorail and remove anything we think we can put in a couple of cars and trucks and get the hell out of there. It was fun to plan and talk about, like, we were going to go back there and salvage pieces of monorail history. We felt like this was a righteous thing to do. So that's just a couple of monorail shenanigans stories from the past. There's so many more stories, but there's just a couple of things that we did, and hopefully you enjoyed some of these. More stuff coming next week in episode 15 of Monorail Monday. Next week specifically, going to talk about some crazy guest stories. There's going to be a few really good stories of guest shenanigans. We talked a little about cast member shenanigans tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about guest shenanigans on next week's episodes. So thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing, sharing, and telling your friends. Thanks for watching Monorail Monday. If you watch any of our other episodes, thanks for watching those. Be sure to check out the Travel Talk. There's going to be some good stories there. And remember, kids, most importantly, like it says on the back of our t-shirts here, have a good time all the time.